As for the fight over players resting down the stretch, well, all parties reacting last night.
I've been doing this for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. And everybody was like, you know what? That's the smartest thing Papa's ever done.
The league has to understand that the science of what we do is a whole lot more sophisticated than it used to be.
Players are much more vulnerable to injury when they're worn out. And we have data that shows that.
That devalues everything as it relates to the NBA. That's not good for anyone involved.
I'm in total sympathy, with that group of people that saves their money and brings your child and, all of a sudden so-and-so's not there.
I genuinely feel bad for people who bought tickets, but I care about my players' health more. That's my job.
And by no means am I saying that there shouldn't be opportunities for rest when there's a reward.
Give us guys a couple games off, and here they go, 5 championships. It's the smartest thing.
We have definitely added years to people, so it's a trade-off.
Just going down to 75 games. I wouldn't be opposed to it, even at the expense of my own salary.
It shouldn't be too much to ask to get players to show up consistently and give a maximum effort.
I don't understand why it's become a problem now because I'm starting to sit out a couple games.
Thoughts of LeBron James, who has played nearly 4,100 regular season minutes in his career, already 4th all-time in career playoff minutes, despite being just 32. And for some context here, since we're talking about players back in the day, well, he's played 800 more combined regular season playoff minutes than Michael Jordan, despite playing 2 fewer games in his career than Jordan did in his. So for more, we welcome in Cavs reporter Dave McMenamin. He's with the team in Denver. Star players have historically carried heavy minutes and had long and productive careers. Now, how does this apply, this particular issue, to LeBron James in terms of resting here over the final 3 weeks of the regular season?
Well, Hannah, you just laid out his resume. People think about him as a young guy because he came into the league as a teenager, but he's logged so many games, so many playoff runs, 6 straight consecutive NBA Finals that make him a unique case compared to anybody else, any other superstar. The Cavs' plan coming into the year was to get LeBron James 1 game of rest out of every 10 games. So far, they've played 69 games. He's had 6 games where he didn't play. If they, extrapolate that from now until the beginning of the playoffs, you're talking about maybe 1 or 2 more games where LeBron James would rest. And the Cavs have 3 more back-to-backs, including one coming up this weekend at Charlotte and then home against the Washington Wizards. Perhaps you could see LeBron rest one of those 2 games, and we'll see, since this is such a hot-button issue right now, how the league will react if that is the case.
Well, part of the issue on the league's part is that this announcement that the 3 players would miss that game on March 18th was made an hour and a half before the game. Understandably, Love is working his way back from knee surgery. That's something that they knew. But Tyronn Lue said that Kyrie and LeBron both wanted to play. So I want to ask you, because you cover this team, how is Lue making his decisions? Is he relying on biometric data? Is he talking to his trainers? What's the protocol?
Yeah, Hannah, Ty and the Cavs training staff have something where it's pretty simple. They have the green zone, the yellow zone, and the red zone for their players, and it measures a variety of things that to figure out, just how susceptible a player would be for injury based on the workload he's had coming into that game. While Kyrie Irving may have wanted to play, Kyrie Irving did have knee tightness the game before in that win Thursday night against the Utah Jazz that precluded him from playing in the 4th quarter. That's the same knee that he had to undergo surgery for back in the 2015 finals that didn't allow him to finish off that series against the Golden State Warriors, or maybe you'd be talking about the Cavs as back-to-back champions. So there were extenuating circumstances out of Ty Lue just making a unilateral decision saying, you know what, my guys could use the night off. 2 of his guys were dealing with a health issue, and with those 2 guys dealing with that, he didn't want to trot LeBron out solo. He wanted to maximize their chance to win a game while they were in Los Angeles and play the entire Big 3 together Sunday when they had the second night of the back-to-back against the Lakers.
And again, the league is calling on teams to make this an organizational decision, not just the coaches, not just the trainers, but holding owners accountable. And they're going to discuss that at the Board of Governors meeting coming up in April. Dave, thanks so much for explaining how the Cavaliers are approaching this. This also bears explaining. How will the new CBA impact the schedule next year because it pertains to this issue? The season will be extended by a week. It is expected to start earlier. And to accommodate that, preseason games are going to be reduced next year to no more than 6 per team. Back-to-backs, that's an issue. League-wide, they're going to be reduced to historic lows. 4 games in 5 nights. What about that? That is going to be virtually eliminated come next season. So that's already in place as we bring in Tim Legler and front office insider Tom Penn, who's joining us from L.A. So we look at the schedule changes next season. And, Tom, let's start with you. How much will that mitigate these issues that we're talking about?
It's going to help, that's for sure. It's a step in the right direction. You reduce those meaningless preseason games, extend the regular season, and then eliminate back-to-backs. I think the real focus here, Hannah, is on these marquee matchups and protecting the national television performances and quality of play. These leagues have, or the broadcast partners have paid so much for these games. It's time we protect that, and there's this trend where coaches, in my opinion, are sending a symbolic message to their team that says, we're going to sit you in this marquee game because I care about you so much. You're first, not the national TV deals, not the league. I'm about you, my team, protecting you, and then the others are having to keep up. So we've got this epidemic of the superstars sitting in the marquee games, and the league could do more to protect those games. No back-to-backs in those moments. Maybe incentivize the players to do more. That's really the main issue here, I think, is the marquee TV games where everybody sits.
It's interesting that Tom mentions that. It's almost a game of mimicking Greg Popovich. Well, he cares about his guys. He'll say his guys, by the way, I'm a player's coach too, so why don't you just take a seat and take a rest?
Yeah, a lot of that goes on. I think even from the player standpoint, a lot of it's a status symbol. You feel like if you're on that level, you should get a night off. If I'm my team's best player and I'm a star, if I don't get a night off, what are you saying about me? You don't think I'm on that level? So that plays into a little bit. But look, if you just take it at face value for what the analytics guys are saying and the teams are saying, which is this is going to extend guys' careers and it's going to make them better even in the current year when it really matters in the postseason. Even if you bought that, which I think that's going to take years to know because it's only prevalent right now. This is a new thing that's going on around the league. So you got to wait a couple of decades. Let's see what it does to these guys long term. The things that they talk about they're doing next year with the scheduling, they're all going to help. But Tom hits it on the head. The bottom line is this. If you can avoid it on these big games, the heavyweight matchups, when you're expecting to see these star players play on a network game, on a package that was created just to show those kinds of games, if you can avoid that by what you do in the 24 to 48 hours leading up to those matchups, so there's no excuse why they're not playing, I think a lot of this talk will die down because you're talking about relationships with networks and sponsors, and it's a completely different product, and the interest isn't close to the same if those guys aren't playing. It's a lot different than the NFL where people are going to watch no matter what because it's similar product and the interest is so high. In the NBA, if those guys aren't playing, people aren't going to tune in. And that's a big problem for Adam Silver in the league.
It's something that a fan might understand, certainly, Tom, that, listen, you take a great player, right? And he has to sit once in a while. Right. But then you take the 3 best players on a team, and they're missing a game en masse. And that seems to be a real sticking point for the league is, okay, why don't you spread these minutes out, but don't sit everybody at once? How can teams not do that?
Well, first, there's got to be support from ownership, from the executive side of things that says, yes, this is a league priority, and yes, we want to go that direction. Think about it, Hannah. These marquee guys are going to be making close to $40 million a year because of all this revenue coming in, right? In an 80-game season, that's $500,000 per night. That's $500,000 per game. And I know that logic always applies, but things that the league should do to incentivize the marquee players, you know, they could extend the season a little bit more, get 1 more week either way. They could definitely stay away from these back-to-backs on marquee nights for these nationally televised games. And then I think they could come up with a bonus for these marquee players who show up and play in a certain number of those games without injury. That's a small pool of players. You come up with some sort of way to spiff them on a league-wide basis? I don't know. I'm trying to think outside of the box, and Adam Silver does that. When he'll go, he won't just ask. He'll come with more of a creative solution. But it starts by sounding the alarm to the owners and getting all of the organization behind this, because it's such a critical priority for the biggest partners in the league.
Right, he's not going to let the owners pass the buck down to the GM and the GM to the coach and the coach to the trainers and the trainers say, here's our analytics, here's our green, yellow, and what did he say? Green, yellow, and red, right? That's what the Cavs have, okay? So if you're in the red zone, you can't play. So if we're thinking about this just in terms of those kinds of numbers, which, as you said, we don't know how they're going to bear out, do you even buy the notion that, hey, the Spurs won 5 championships because they rested their players, or this team didn't win championships because their players were tired?
I do not. It's way too big of a blanket statement. It's too vague, and there's so many other factors that go into those things. Look, Tim Duncan played a really long time in the NBA. Guess what? A lot of big guys have. If you look traditionally over the history of the league, the guys that have careers that last long typically are bigs. It's not quite as demanding with the amount of running you have to do and all that you have to do on the perimeter and guarding guys out on the perimeter, all those things. I mean, Kareem played 20-plus years. You know, this wasn't a prevalent thought process then. So Tim Duncan had a very long career. A lot went into winning those championships, a lot more than getting a few days off in the course of the season. It's a blanket statement that makes it seem like you can apply this to any team that has the ability to win a championship because they have enough talent. If you do this, this is the formula. I just don't buy it. One thing that does bother me, I'm not just former grumpy player, but one thing that bothers me when you try to indicate a picture that it's so much more difficult to win the second night of a back-to-back on the road than it's ever been. I don't get it. It's actually easier than it's ever been because of how the travel and all of the other conveniences that teams have and staff that they have to make sure that you're feeling as good as you possibly can. You know, you talk about the Cavs winning once in a back-to-back situation on the road this year. Well, a lot of those games, there's only 12 of those all year, by the way. A lot of those, they didn't have their 3 best players. They weren't playing in the game. So you're using a stat to make it seem like it's impossible to do it. You know, we did it 15 times in 1996-97. We were 8-7 in those situations, and everybody played. So I do take a little bit of offense when you make it seem like it's just so much more difficult now to win that second night of a back-to-back. It's been going on forever. If you want to tell me the science indicates this is good for the players, well, let's see. Get back to me in 20 years, and I'll see how it bore out on this current crop of players, because you're not going to be able to know that right now.
And the Warriors sat their 3 on the second end of a back-to-back, and then they lost both games. They lost back-to-back. So there you go.
The science of what we do is a whole lot more sophisticated than it used to be.
Players are much more vulnerable to injury when they're worn out, and we have data that shows that.
That devalues everything as it relates to the NBA. That's not good for anyone involved.
I'm in total sympathy, you know, with that group of people that saves their money and brings your child, and, you know, all of a sudden so-and-so's not there.
I genuinely feel bad for people who bought tickets, but I care about my players' health more. That's my job.
And by no means am I saying that there shouldn't be opportunities for rest when there's a reward.
As for the fight over players resting down the stretch, well, all parties reacting last night.
I've been doing this for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. And everybody was like, you know what? That's the smartest thing Papa's ever done.
The league has to understand that
These guys a couple games off, and here they go, 5 championships. It's the smartest thing.
we have definitely added years to people, so, you know, it's a trade-off.
Just going down to 75 games. I wouldn't be opposed to it, even you know, at the expense of my own salary.
It shouldn't be too much to ask to get players to show up consistently and give a maximum effort.
I don't understand why it's become a problem now, because I started to sit out a couple games.
Thoughts of LeBron James, who has played nearly 4,100 regular season minutes.